Welcome to this evening's lecture in the Ralph Miliband series of this year on the future of global capitalism. It's a great pleasure this evening to welcome Dr. Ha-Joon Chang, who will speak on the intriguing title of Hamlet Without the Prince, how development has disappeared from today's development discourse. He is currently reader in political economy at the University of Cambridge, where he's taught since 1990. He's also served as a member on the editorial board of the Cambridge Journal of Economics since 1992. He was born in South Korea and earned his MPhil and PhD at the Faculty of Economics in Cambridge, where he's more or less lived over half your life, or certainly a good chunk of it. Yeah. He's the author of several very influential books, including Kicking Away the Ladder, Development Strategy and Historical Perspectives, which won a number of very prestigious prizes. Other books include Globalization, Economic Development of the Role of State, Reclaiming Development, an Alternative Economic Policy Manual, and Bad Samaritans. His new book, just about to come out in this...
Well, not quite, in September, yeah.
Is called 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism, and it'll be published shortly from Penguin. We all want to know why 23, but maybe...
Why not?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. It's a very peculiar number. And it's certainly not a round number. He's obviously published, apart from these very well-known books, numerous articles in many different kinds of journals on the state, market, and institutions, on globalization, on trade and industrial policies, and on the East Asian economies. Apart from this, he's worked as a consultant to many international organizations, including the UN agencies, the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and he's worked as a consultant for governments as diverse as Canada, Japan, South Africa, the UK, and Venezuela on development policies. Please join with me in giving him a very warm welcome.
Right. Thank you, David, for that very generous introduction. Well, why 23 things? Since the subject has been raised, actually, I started with 20, and then I was sitting around with my literary agent, and both of us told each other, isn't 20 too boring? So I said, yeah, on the other hand, I don't think I can write on 30 things or 29 things, so I started at 25 and thought that was too obvious. I don't like even numbers. 21 was too close to 20. So 23 was born. And later, hearing this title, people have come with all kinds of speculations, which I hadn't imagined was possible. One theory was that I was a fan of Michael Jordan, the famous American basketball player. I am a big fan of baseball, but not basketball, so I didn't even know that he had number 23. Some people pointed out that there was this movie with Jim Carrey called 23, which apparently in which the 23 is the foundation of all conspiracy theories. Some people thought I picked it because 23 was a prime number. Of course, later realized that it was a prime number, but that wasn't the reason. It was one of those random things. Anyway, so much for the advertisement. The definition of development has, of course, always been a contentious issue. Income level is, of course, one of the most widely accepted single measure of development, but most people would agree that development is something more than providing higher material standards of living. So the most well-known in this respect is the UNDP's Human Development Index and its various variations. This humanistic dimension of development, if you like, emphasized by these indicators is of course, absolutely essential in making us remember that material progress is only the means and not the end of development, which is something that is unfortunately forgotten too frequently. But there's another dimension that used to be central to the definition of development in the early days of development economics, 1950s and 60s, but has become increasingly forgotten. And it is the production side of development. Before the rise of neoliberalism, since the late 1970s, there was a general consensus that development is largely about the transformation of the productive structure and, of course, transformation of the technological and organizational capabilities that support it, and the resulting transformation of social structures such as urbanization, dissolution of the traditional family, changes in gender relations, rise in labor movement, the advent of the welfare state, and so on. This was mainly, although not exclusively, to be achieved through industrialization. And even though they radically disagreed on how exactly this was to be done, most people, ranging from Walt Rostow on the right to the dependency theories on the left, share the view that development is something centered around a process of transformation in the productive structure. And indeed, most of us still hold such view at the instinctive level. Why do we refuse to classify countries like Brunei, which has very high per capita income, as developed? Because we implicitly think that achieving high income growth through resource bonanza is not development. At the other extreme, following the Second World War, Germany's per capita income fell to the level of that of Peru and Mexico, but no one suggested that Germany should be reclassified as a developing country, because people knew that Germany still had the, despite millions of deaths, still had the technologies and organizational capabilities to regain its pre-war level of living standard quickly, which it did in about 10 years. Now, these examples show that we implicitly believe that in order to qualify as developed, an economy's high income should be based on essentially superior knowledge embodied in technologies and institutions rather than simple command over resources. However, during the last quarter of a century, development has come to mean something quite different. It has come to mean poverty reduction, provision of basic needs, individual betterment in the sense of providing better education and health and so on, and sustenance of existing productive structure that is anything but development in the traditional sense. And this is why I talk about Hamlet. I mean, the development discourse has turned into a Hamlet without the Prince of Denmark. I mean, the central character is missing. I'll try to elaborate this point by looking at, critically looking at the use of term development in some of today's key development discourses. And I basically look at three things: the Millennium Development Goals, the Doha Development Agenda of the WTO, and the discourse on the microfinance. Let's first look at the MDGs. Since the rise of neoliberalism, many people in the rich countries have come to take the view that developing countries are what they are only because of their own inabilities and corruption, and therefore that the rich countries do not have any moral obligation to help them. Fortunately, this view is not, well, at least yet, the mainstream view in most rich countries. Most people still believe that with a strong help from the rich countries, the developing countries can pull themselves out of poverty. And the most progressive and comprehensive of the mainstream discourse on development along this line is the Millennium Development Goals of the United Nations. There are many different elements in the MDGs, as they are known, especially as each goal has a number of targets that span across different sub-issues. So, for example, that on the goal 7, you have 3-4 different targets. Goal 8, 4-5 different targets. So that is a lot more complex than what you see up here. But looking at them, you will realize that most of them are basically about reducing poverty and improving education and health. And this is obvious for goals number 1 to 6, but even goal 7, environmental sustainability, if you look at the targets under that, you see that a lot of it is actually about health, because one of the targets is improving access to safe drinking water. Another target is increasing access to improved sanitation. Now, laudable these goals and targets may be, in my view, their sum total does not amount to development. Therefore, the only explicitly developmental dimension in the MDGs is really in Goal 8, and the targets under this goal include the following. So, development of an open, rule-based, predictable, non-discriminatory trading system, reduction of foreign debt, increase in foreign aid from the rich countries, provision of access to affordable essential drugs, and the spread of new technologies, mainly information and communications technologies. Now, the two last items are, more marginal in the international development discourse. So essentially, this vision of development is based on the trinity of increased aid, debt reduction, and increased trade. This is the mainstream agenda. HIPIC, Gleneagle, what have you. Now, of course, unless they are on a very large scales, debt reduction and increased aid are simply enabling conditions. No one's saying that countries can develop with reduction in the debt and increased aid. So the trading regime actually becomes the key in this vision. This pro-developmental trading system is, in this vision, essentially one where the rich countries reduce their tariffs and subsidies on agriculture, textile, clothing, and other things that developing countries export, especially the least developed countries. So the AGOA initiative by the American government, the European ABA, the anything but arms the agreement, and so on. So that's the kind of trading regime that is central to this vision. And unfortunately, in this vision, there is no notion that developing countries actually need to get out of those activities. When you think about it, the specializing in those activities, after all, what keep them poor? Interestingly, doing more of the same things that you are doing today is not how the rich countries became rich themselves. As I show in my previous books in slightly different ways, Kicking Over the Ladder and Bad Samaritans. Yes, this is probably the only book, at least so far, recommended both by Martin Wolf and Noam Chomsky. So there's got to be something there. Huh? Anyway, so in these books I show how, starting from 18th century Britain through to the 19th century United States, Germany, and Sweden, down to 20th century Japan, Korea, Thailand, and Finland, development has been achieved by upgrading our country's productive capabilities and moving into more difficult industries by using protection, subsidies, and many other means of market-defying government intervention. So actually, the rich countries are, by recommending this route to development, insofar as it can be really called a route to development, they are actually saying that today's developing countries should do something completely different from what they themselves did when they were developing countries. Huh? You can call it historical amnesia or double standard, but whatever it is, that is not going to be good. Huh? Now, in saying this, I do not mean that all forms of traditional activities, such as agriculture or textile, are incompatible with development. Now, this is an important point. Huh? After all, the Netherlands, unbeknownst to most people, is actually the third largest exporter of agriculture. I mean, can you believe it? I mean, this country has the fifth highest population density in the world, I mean, excluding city-states and islands like Hong Kong and Vanuatu. Huh? So land is the last thing you have. Huh? And in the standard economic textbook, you are always taught that in agriculture, you need land and labor. Yeah? Where's the land? Yeah? I mean, land is the last thing that the Netherlands has, but the country still is the third largest exporter of agricultural products. Huh? Now it's different, but until the early 1990s, Germany used to be the world's fifth largest exporter of textile and clothing. Yeah? So you can actually get quite rich on the basis of these so-called traditional activities, only that these were possible because these countries applied advanced technologies to the traditional activities and upgraded them. Yeah? So the Netherlands, you don't have land? Okay, you get rid of land in agricultural production process. Yeah? A lot of Dutch agriculture is done in water, yeah? Hydroponic agriculture. Yeah? When the East Asian textile imports threatened their textile industries, the British reaction was, well, you know, we are losing out because of the low wages in those countries, so we should also compete in low wages. Yeah? Let's import workers from Bangladesh and Pakistan. Yeah? It might work for the first few years, but after a while, these workers also need to be paid a local rate. The British textile industry completely collapsed. Yeah? The German reaction was, there's no way we can compete in the low wages. Yeah? So we have to upgrade. Yeah? So we develop specialty textile. Yeah? We invest in the design industry. Yeah? You know, I mean, probably that if someone said mentioned the phrase the German fashion design in, I don't know, 1930s, probably that they would, I mean, that phrase would have been called an oxymoron. Yeah? But today, I mean, you know, I mean, starting from Karl Lagerfeld in the office market, yeah, to the Hugo Boss and so on, I mean, there are a lot of German fashion designers. Yeah? I mean, this is how they maintain the textile industry. Huh? Anyway, the point is that you can, I mean, the point is that it's not the kind of activity that matters. I mean, this how you produce. Huh? So at the other extreme, if you look at, say, statistics on the export structure, Philippines has one of the highest share of high-tech export in the world. Yeah? Why do we not then call Philippines a developed country? Because their high-tech export is organized by someone else, using someone else's technology and has very little root in the local economy. So when these foreign companies leave, the Philippines will go back to primary commodity production. Anyway, I mean, basically the point that I'm trying to make here is that it's not what a country has, but how it gets it that determines whether a country is developed or not. And without any vision of transformation in productive structure, the vision of development behind the MDGs can only be described as development without development. Now, the non-developmental nature of the MDGs is bad enough, but the development discourse becomes positively anti-developmental when it comes to the so-called Doha development agenda of the WTO talks. Now, this agenda was launched in the ministerial talk of the WTO back in 2001. It's got lots of different elements, but essentially the idea is that you need to do what I call the agriculture industry swap. Yeah? So basically the idea is that the rich countries should reduce their agriculture protection and subsidies so that the poor countries can export what they are good at, yeah? And also the textile and clothing. Yeah? In return, the developing countries should lower industrial tariff so that the rich countries can do what they are good at, which is producing industrial products. Oh, sorry. And the central element in this the deal is done through the so-called NAMA, or non-agricultural market access negotiations, which is essentially about cutting industrial tariffs in the developing countries. Now, the trouble with this vision is, first of all, that this agriculture industry swap is not going to help development very much, even in the anodyne MDG sense. Why is that? Because many developing countries actually net agriculture importers. And many of them will actually get hurt in the short run because the prices of their agriculture imports are going to go up if the rich countries give up subsidies on those products. You may say that in the long run that's a good thing. I'm not enough of an expert on agriculture to pass a judgment on that, but it's very clear that in the short run this will hurt a lot of developing countries. And then we'll have impact on health and hunger, which are all part of the MDG agenda. Moreover, the main beneficiaries of this opening up of agriculture markets in the developed world are going to be developed countries with strong agriculture like the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. I mean, they are going to get, depending on the estimate, 70 to 75% of the benefits. The problem is that, most developing countries specialize in exporting agriculture products, but which are the products that are usually known as tropical products. Cocoa, coffee, those kind of things. Whereas the protection and subsidies in the rich countries are concentrated in what are known as temperate products, beef, wheat, dairy. I mean, which European countries have protection against cocoa? For the simple reason that there are no European cocoa farmers. I mean, there are exceptions like sugar, because the developing countries produce cane sugar, but European countries produce beet sugar. So Finland has protection against sugar. Tobacco and cotton in the American South, that's another set of exceptions. But essentially, the protection and subsidies in the rich countries are focused on those temperate products. And there are only, even according to the World Bank, which is a big fan of this idea, there are only 2 developing countries that are going to benefit in a major way from this, and they are Brazil and Argentina. Yeah? And when you think about this, some of the main victims of this deal are going to be poor farmers. Of course, I mean, rich by international standard, but poor by their national standard. Poor farmers in countries like Norway, Japan, and Switzerland. And are we really willing to say that these farmers should go to hell so that some rich agricultural capitalists in Argentina can become even richer? There's a serious problem here, because we have been sold this image of this dismantling of agricultural protection in the rich countries benefiting poor farmers in Ghana and Cambodia. No, they are not going to be the main beneficiaries. The main beneficiaries are going to be the agro corporations of the United States and Australia, and very rich landlords in Brazil and Argentina. I have a problem with that. More importantly, in the long run, this Doha development agenda is going to hinder development by making infant industry protection very difficult. In return for liberalization in agriculture and textile and clothing by the rich countries, developing countries are demanded to reduce their industrial tariffs. Of course, this will bring some benefits to the consumers of the developing countries, because they'll now be able to buy cheaper industrial products, but these gains are unlikely to be more than 1.5% of GDP, and at that a one-off gain. And this is according to the World Bank. Once again, a fan of this idea. And this benefit is soon going to be overwhelmed by the long-term losses that come from the inability to promote infant industries. If the rich countries have their way in these NAMA negotiations, average industrial tariff rate in developing countries will go down to about 5 to 7%. And this is the lowest level of tariff since the days of colonialism and unequal treaties, when the developing countries are simply deprived of their right to set their own tariffs. And with very few exceptions, they will be also lower than the rates that had prevailed in today's developed countries until the early 1970s. Moreover, the context in which the industrial tariff cuts are to be made magnifies their potential negative impacts, because in the last few decades, through the IMF and World Bank structural adjustment programs, the WTO, various bilateral and regional free trade and investment agreements, other tools of industrial promotion have become either impossible to use or very circumscribed. Subsidies, quantitative restrictions, which are completely banned in the WTO, foreign investment regulations, foreign exchange rationing, and many other tools. And this has actually increased the relative importance of tariffs. So tariff cuts today are much more damaging to developing countries than, say, in the 1960s or 70s. To make it even worse, the tariff cuts are to be made in a manner that is much more stringent than before. For example, when the Uruguay round of the GATT talks, which gave birth to the WTO, was concluded in 1995, countries were made to cut average tariffs. This time, no, it's going to be a cut line by line. Tariff has to come down on every product. And they are using this that particular formula called the Swiss formula. I don't know why it's called Swiss formula, but Swiss formula which forces you to cut higher tariffs more steeply. So until now, countries have actually the freedom to kind of choose certain industries. I mean, the obligation is on average, so you can choose to, although few countries actually do, in theory at least, you can choose to protect certain products very heavily while having low tariff on other products. This time it's not going to be allowed if this NAMA deal is struck according to the wishes of the rich countries. So if you see it this way, the Doha development deal is not simply non-developmental like the MDGs, but it is deeply anti-developmental in the sense that it not only encourages developing countries to stick to their current production structure, but also makes it almost impossible for them to move away from it in the future. Now, having said all these things, I think it would be unfair to say that there is no consideration in this the currently dominant vision of development, no consideration of the increase in the productive capabilities. After all, improvements in health and education emphasized by the MDGs should increase the productive capabilities of the individuals, especially the poor people. However, today's the mainstream development discourse sees these increases in productive capabilities as happening mainly through individual betterment. So, for example, if we go back, 6 of the 8 MDGs are about improving income, health, and education of individuals, with the partial exception of Goal 3, which by definition is a relational thing because it's a gender agenda. But it's all about individuals getting more education, individuals that having lower chance of death, individuals having access to health. Another important example is microfinance, which is supposed to promote development by helping people lift themselves out of poverty through their own entrepreneurial efforts. I mean, at one level, there's nothing wrong with all this. I mean, entrepreneurship is important, albeit it's although it's not the only thing that matters. When the capabilities of individuals in a country are enhanced, the country's productive capabilities are likely to increase. So at one level, nothing to object to, but there are only so many productive capabilities that can be developed through improvement at the individual level. If you actually look at the process of the technological development and economic growth in general, I mean, not in some abstract, aggregated way, but if you look at the real process, you realize that development in productive capabilities actually mainly occur in productive enterprises, be they state-owned firms or the small private firms or large private firms or cooperatives. However well-educated and healthy the individuals may be, they cannot produce rapid, lasting, and sustainable productivity growth that makes development possible unless they are employed by firms engaged in production activities with large scopes of productivity increase. And even if the total number and the capabilities of the individuals involved are the same, more and better ideas will be produced by individuals working together in a productive enterprise because they go through a process of cross-fertilization. Moreover, much of knowledge in productive enterprises is acquired in a collective manner, in the sense that they are created in the context of a complex division of labor, rather than through the activities of isolated individuals, and they are deposited in the form of organizational routines and institutional memories rather than purely in individuals. And because of this, productivity growth is a collective process. Let me put it more graphically. I mean, this is getting a bit abstract. Yeah? Suppose that you have, say, 10 extra street food stores, or 1,000 extra food stores, or 1,000 one-man TV repair shops. How much productivity are they going to enhance compared to one modern supermarket or one large electronics manufacturer, each employing 600 workers and getting supplies from 20 small enterprises that employ 20 people each on average? Even if all those 1,000 owners of the food stores or 1,000 TV repair shop owners have PhDs in food technology or electronics, and even if most of the 1,000 people working in modern enterprises have only primary education, my view is that the former are still unlikely to enhance the country's productive capabilities as much as the latter can. We tend to think that individual education and things like that is the main driver of the economic development, but it's not. I mean, let me give you one simple example. Switzerland, one of the richest countries in the world, has by far the lowest university enrollment ratio in the rich world. Actually, it's a university enrollment ratio until recently it has been in the 30s, 34%, 37% of the relevant age cohort. In the United States, it's around 80%. In South Korea, it's 90%. Even Latvia has 60%. So how come? I mean, the Swiss have a much higher living standard than the Koreans and the Latvians, despite having much less educated labor. Anyway, I leave that statistic with you. So this emphasis on individual capabilities and entrepreneurial energies is largely misplaced. Yes, I mean, those things are important, but that's not what development is about. I mean, to put it differently, what really distinguishes the US and Germany from, say, the Philippines or Nigeria are really their Boeings and Volkswagens. It's not their PhDs in economics, not their engineers, not their medical doctors. Actually, the Philippines and Nigeria happen to export those people. It's because they don't have enterprises like Boeings and Volkswagens that they are poor. What really distinguishes, say, Ecuador or Vietnam from the US or Japan is not the raw entrepreneurial energy of the people that the neoliberals so often talk about, but the abilities of the latter countries to establish and manage productive enterprises that can channel the individual energy into raising productivity. People in rich countries often have this mistaken idea that, developing countries do not develop because their people are not enterprising enough. I mean, they don't have enough go-getters and movers and shakers. People who think like that haven't been to developing countries. No, you go there and you see that the place is full of entrepreneurial energy, because people are desperate. So they sell everything that you can think of and everything that you couldn't think of. No, really, I mean, in many developing countries, you can actually buy places in queue for the American embassy. There are professional queuers. There are people who will get money from you for watching your car, which means refraining from damaging your car. I mean, people have, so much entrepreneurial initiative and energy, partly because they are desperate, but they don't add up too much, because they lack this organization, they lack this institutional arrangements. So I say that what little development that there is in terms of productive development in the currently dominant vision of development is what I call ersatz developmentalism. The belief that if you educate people better and make them healthier and give them security of property rights, all these rational, self-seeking individuals will exercise their natural tendency to, well, to quote from Adam Smith's truck and barter and somehow create a prosperous economy. No country has actually developed in that kind of way. In reality, development requires a lot of collective and systematic efforts at acquiring and accumulating better productive knowledge through the construction of better organizations, cross-fertilization of ideas within those organizations, and mechanisms to channel this individual entrepreneurial energy into collective entrepreneurship. So to conclude, the currently dominant development agenda has singularly failed to deliver any lasting development in the last few decades. I mean, I don't have time to go into the statistics, but basically, growth has collapsed in developing countries in sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America. For example, in the bad old days of import substitution, per capita income in Latin America used to grow at about 3%. In the last 30 years, the growth rate has been barely 1%. And to overcome this, we need to go back to what I call the productionist tradition of all development economics, and put the transformation in productive capabilities that go beyond individuals back at the heart of development thinking. Of course, by saying this, I'm not saying that, well, we can dust off our Albert Hirschman and that we'll have the answer. No, I mean, there are lots of things that all development economics didn't pay enough attention to, partly, out of circumstance, partly out of intellectual failings. So there are all these new dimensions that you need to bring in, non-material dimensions as embodied in human development approach and sense capability approaches. The question of politics. I mean, it's unfair to say that old school development economists didn't think about politics, but it is also true that they tended to assume that the government is basically well-intentioned and reasonably capable, which often is not the case. They didn't pay enough attention to institutions. Technological development process was largely overlooked. You just assume that somehow technological development will happen. Of course, since the 80s, there has been an explosion in the literature on how technologies actually develop. So you look at farm organizations, the labor process, inter-farm linkages, global production networks. So there are things that can fill this gap, but it is true that in the old days, technological development was taken rather for granted. And of course, no one could blame them for not thinking about environmental sustainability, because people didn't simply realize that that could be a problem. So we need to bring in these extra dimensions, but at the heart of it, I still think that the productionist perspective should form the core. And of course, saying all this is a lot easier than done. But unless we develop a new development discourse, basically development that will be reduced poverty reduction. I'm not against poverty reduction, of course, but it's not the same. And we have forgotten this very important point. And therefore, we believe that we can basically develop these countries by giving them a bit more aid, canceling a bit more debt, and buy a bit more fair trade coffee. No, this is not going to happen, believe me. Anyway, I'll stop there and invite you to make questions and comments. Thank you.
thank you very much. A very engaging, concise presentation with a very distinctive argument, and I suspect there are questions. So we usually take them in clusters. Is that all right? We'll take a number of questions.
Yeah, 3 or 4. And
I've got at least 3 or 4 in my cluster, but I won't usurp my position yet. So if you could just raise your hand so I can see who wants to ask a question. Yes, should we go to the lady at the back with a hand up, and then the gentleman with his hand up there, and then we'll have a look at the top. Yes. And then the top mic over there. Go ahead. Perhaps you could just say who you are.
Okay, Isabel Crabtree. Where in your view...
Can you put the mic closer to you?
Where in your view of this new developmentalism do you see extractive industries and extractive industrialization fitting in?
Okay. Guy, yes. One moment.
Pasco Sabido from the LSE. Do you see a shift in development discourse happening with a global shift in power, perhaps from north to south or west to east, or do you see the institutionalization of the WTO locking in these countries into neoliberal discourse, and therefore even that might not bring it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, Lady Top.
Yes, thank you for a wonderful lecture. I was just wondering how important do you think that infrastructure is for development, and if so, what kind of infrastructure for the type of development you have been talking about? Thank you.
Okay, anyone?
One more? Yeah?
Yes, let's go to this guy here at the front. There's time for probably several rounds of questions, so don't feel excluded yet.
Hi, my name is Asad, and when you said production is at the heart of all the new development improvements that a country can take, I'm from Pakistan, and there's so many industries over there. But the thing is, it's cheap labor, and those companies and industries are earning a lot of money, but it's not trickling down in the economy. So, would you like to explain what it is that we need to do?
One more, yeah, Mary Caldo.
When you say productionism, something I've got a great deal of sympathy with, do you just mean manufacturing and agriculture, or do you also include services? What about tourism, for example? Is there a post-manufacturing developmentalism?
Yeah.
Should we start with those?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for very good questions. Well, I have nothing against extractive industries. After all, the US and Australia have greatly benefited from very efficient and high-tech mining industry. And Finland started with cutting down trees, but it upgraded into making paper-making machinery. So yes, I mean, extractive industries can actually be a basis for productive development. Of course, the kind of assumption is that you have to do it with your own technology and organization. If you just kind of lease your oil field to someone else, very little of it is going to lead to long-term development. So, I mean, it's once again not the physical nature of the product or the things like that, but how you actually do it. Global shift in power, well, I think, we are really gazing into crystal balls here, but it is happening, but I think it's highly exaggerated. When the people say things like, oh, the Chinese economy will be bigger than the US economy by year 2017 or 20, I mean, they are, first of all, citing purchasing power parity figures, which might be a better reflection of your living standard, but that doesn't correctly reflect your economic power in the international economy. And secondly, purchasing power numbers vary a lot according to your method of estimate. So when the World Bank decided to change the method of estimate in 2009, I think, Chinese income was, in purchasing power parity terms, reduced by 37%. So actually, the shift is happening, but it's not happening to the extent that many people think it is happening. And who says the Chinese and Indian growth are sustainable? Huh? They have a serious problem with political sustainability before they even worry about environmental sustainability. So I reserve my judgment there. Now, having said that, you know, WTO is a man-made agreement. Yeah? If you want to change it, we can change it. Yeah? So, you know, the locking in, yes, I mean, because yeah, the powerful countries want it that way, but if that power shifts, we can rewrite the agreement. Yeah? So it's to be seen. Huh? Infrastructure, yes, I mean, infrastructure is absolutely essential. Huh? But I think the problem at the moment is that people think of infrastructure in a way that is de-linked from industrial strategy. Huh? You know, I mean, there is this influential school of thought which says, yes, government should do industrial policy, but not of the kind of selective kind that intervenes at the industry level as the Japanese and the Koreans use, but they should do general industrial policy like infrastructure. Yeah? That's actually wrong because, you know, you do not build some abstract road. Yeah? You do not build some abstract railway. I mean, you either build a new road linking your new, I don't know, the airport with a region producing your cut flour export, or you build a railway linking your copper mine with your seaport. Yeah? Which one are you going to build? Yeah? You don't have unlimited amount of money. Yeah? So you need actually a good industrial strategy for good infrastructural development. Yeah? But without a close coordination between these two, you will be wasting a lot of money. Huh? You know, just imagine, I mean, your Ministry of Production might be giving a lot of subsidies to your cut flour exporters while your Ministry of Infrastructure is building the railroad for the copper mines, and the cut flour exporters suffer from bad road. Yeah? Yes, I mean, trickle down, you know, trickle down does happen, but empirically speaking, it happens very little if you leave things to the market. Yeah? So you have to do things to make things trickle down. Yeah? So if you want your income to trickle down, you have to build a good welfare state. Yeah? If you want your foreign investment to trickle down, you need policies to make sure that there is technology transfer, there is a certain degree of local procurement, and of course, the WTO trims or trade-related investment measures agreement has made all this very difficult, if not impossible. Huh? So, I mean, we have a major problem there. Huh? I mean, for example, people often think that countries like South Korea and Taiwan are the proof that foreign investment is good for you. Huh? Well, these countries actually didn't have all that much foreign investment, but as far as they had foreign investment, they had very strict rules on technology transfer, local procurement, worker training, cooperation with suppliers, you know. So you need those things. Services, well, services is actually a very difficult category to think about because it is a catch-all term. Huh? So everyone from your noodle vendor on the street to your, the software engineer is in the services industry. So which bit are we talking about? Huh? And also in most services, raising productivity is very difficult. Huh? I mean, can you imagine a way to raise productivity of a string quartet? Yeah? You know, they could trot through a 27-minute piece in 9 minutes and declare that their productivity has trebled, but they have in the process destroyed the product. Yeah? So actually, there are very few service industries where productivity growth is easy. There are very few, and they usually, not entirely, happen to be activities that are directly linked to the manufacturing industry. Huh? So if you look at tradable high productivity services, they tend to be supplying to the manufacturing sector, yeah? The financial industry, the engineering services, the design, yeah, services and so on, yeah, software. Yeah, I mean, their main customers are not actually ordinary consumers. They actually supply the manufacturing firms. So this idea that somehow you can skip industrialization and build a rich service economy is actually quite mistaken. I mean, once again, Switzerland comes in as a useful example. You know, people often think that Switzerland lives on taking care of black money deposited by third world dictators and selling cowbells and cuckoo clocks to Americans and the Japanese. But actually, you probably didn't, well, unless you read my Bad Samaritans, you didn't know that Switzerland is literally the most industrialized country in the world. Yeah? It has the highest manufacturing output in the world per capita. Yeah? Of course, we don't see many Swiss products, partly because the country is small, but also because it tends to specialize in producer goods, like industrial chemicals, precision machines. Yeah? So you don't see them in the way you see Japanese or Korean or those products, but actually it is, per capita, the most industrialized country in the world. So, I mean, this proposition that we can somehow build, skip industrialization and build sustainable development on the basis of services. Yes, I mean, if you are Seychelles, with 85,000 people and fantastic natural endowment, probably you can have decent standard of living on the basis of services, but very few countries are that lucky.
I've got my hand up, so I'll just choose myself for a second. And I can only get away with that because we've got quite a lot of time to ask you questions. I just want to follow that up by asking you this question. It seems to me that there is a single counterfactual, counter-developmental model presupposed in your critique of development discourse, which is something like infant industry protection, sustained tariffs, better economic organizations, build productive capacity, industrial policy, or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, is there really one, in this day when, the big models have hit the dust, as it were, like the Washington Consensus and the post-Washington Consensus models, are you really arguing that there's one counter-model which is generating, we can just pull out of your critique, or are there, in fact, a diversity of different kinds of models which are much more indexically linked, situationally bound to the context of countries? And we've had two people here recently make those kind of diverse arguments, someone like Justin Lin, who bangs on all the time about comparative advantage and building that up, but someone like Danny Roderick, who actually has a much more sustained model of the pluralist development of countries, so would have a different take coming out of it. And then linked to that, I would just ask you one other question is, in here, there's also something missing. I mean, in a sense, it seems to me China, India, Vietnam, I mean, they have made extraordinary gains in the last 3 to 4 decades. Asia's lifted 600 million people out of poverty. That is quite unprecedented in historical time. So they are getting something right. What is that? And how does that fit into your argument? All right, enough of me. Over to you guys again. Yes, lady with the hands up.
Thank you. I was just wondering, in terms of aid and assistance, to what extent do you think the developed countries are truly altruistic?
Developed countries actually?
Altruistic.
Altruistic, right, okay.
It's a thought. Yes, lady here.
You mentioned environmental sustainability, and I was just wondering to what extent you think the new concerns with environmental sustainability are a legitimate reason for perhaps thinking that developing countries might have to pursue a slightly different trajectory.
Okay, let's just take one more. Yeah, gentleman at the back. I'll come back to you in a minute. We'll come back upstairs in a minute.
When you express a desire for a new discourse and development, do you feel that the problem lies in the conception of neoliberal strategies or in their implementation? In their implementation?
Implementation,
Okay, well, that's more than enough for this round. but we'll come back.
Yeah. Your question, David, it really depends on at what level do you generalize. So if you want to reduce it to a few kind of general principles, like you have to somehow protect and nurture your infant industries, yeah? Infrastructure investment have to be coordinated with your industrial strategy, productive firms need to be built and so on. Yes, then there is one model. On the other hand, if you go into the details, I mean, I have always been of the view that there is no one type of capitalism. There are many different types of capitalism. And I mean, we have to kind of accept that countries have different conditions, different objectives, different political balances of power, and therefore they will all pursue strategies that are very different from each other. Yeah? So, if you're Denmark or Finland, small countries with 4 or 5 million people, what you can do is very different from when you are the United States or China. On the other hand, even with similar conditions, Denmark basically went for small farms organized into cooperatives, agriculture exports, small high-tech design firms. Finland went for big things, Nokia. So, even with similar conditions, countries pursue very different strategies. But if you generalize enough, I mean, you will get some kind of common principles. Now, the real question is whether that particular level of generalization that you have chosen is the appropriate one for the question you're asking. So for some things, yes, I mean, you could talk about one model. For some other things, you cannot even talk about the one model in one country, because in some countries, you have 3 or 4 different regions all pursuing different things. So I'll leave it at that. How about China, India, Vietnam? Yeah, of course, they have been extraordinarily successful. But exactly because while liberalizing, followed essentially what today's rich countries did in the past, rather than what they tell you to do today. No, really, I mean, if you think about, for example, China, I mean, it does almost everything wrong, according to the orthodox. Yeah, I mean, huge public enterprise sector, getting huge subsidies, a lot of regulations on foreign investment. Tariff was the average tariff was about 40% until it joined the WTO. Even after joining the WTO and lowering the tariff to below 20%, there are still a lot of hidden quantitative restrictions, rampant corruption, no democracy. How do you explain that? Once again, I mean, there are worries about these countries. I mean, I talked about the political sustainability of China and India. Vietnam has the same problem, because of the rising inequality and so on. Also, Vietnam, I think, has a bigger problem in terms of the productive strategy, because it has been fantastically good at doing things that are obvious so far. So, for example, until 1986, Vietnam didn't used to export a single coffee bean. Today, it's the second largest exporter of coffee after Brazil. Yeah, you probably didn't know this. So they have been very good at those things, but they haven't really upgraded that much. I was actually in Vietnam in December talking to their government people. They are worried. Whether they'll somehow come up with a more coherent upgrading strategy as China has, I don't know. So there are all these worries, but yes, they have been extremely successful. But my point is that they haven't followed neoliberal strategy. They did liberalize, but that's not the same as following neoliberal strategy in the same way that the Soviet Union allowing some private restaurants in the 1980s wasn't the same as the abolition of socialism. Aid, altruism, yes, I mean, I think there is an element of altruism there because you see aid statistics, and there's a big difference between different countries. Sweden, Norway, they give something like 1.2% of their GDP as foreign aid. Americans, Japanese, they give something like 0.3%. Yeah? So if there wasn't altruism, why would that? I mean, you know, actually, if it was entirely selfish, the Americans would have given more aid because they have more political stake in developing countries. Yeah? What does Norway get from giving aid to poor countries? So there is clearly an element of altruism, but that's not to say that there is no other thing. Yeah? I mean, there are often strategic considerations in giving aid. Environmental sustainability, yes, I mean, this is a major challenge. Because first of all, we have this moral issue. You know, depending on the estimate, between 70 and 85% of CO2 gas in the atmosphere have been produced by today's rich countries. So a lot of developing countries feel very angry about some of these countries, not quite saying, but implying that, well, you guys probably should stay poor so that the world wouldn't collapse. So their view is that if you want the world not to collapse, you have to pay us. Now, there's no easy solution there. There are quite a lot of interesting arguments in this area. I am not an expert, but in my view, I think the technological solution has to be an important part of it. And this means that the developed countries actually will have to do it because most developing countries, I mean, there are some exceptions like China and Brazil, but most developing countries simply do not have the capabilities to come up with environmentally more sustainable technologies. And let's not underestimate the power of technology. I mean, I do not believe in this technological cure-all, but technology is, what has been driving economic development. And, let me give you an example. I mean, in the 1970s, when I was a little schoolboy in South Korea, I was very worried that because everywhere you read, they said the world will run out of oil around 2000. And I realized, my God, I mean, in my 40s, I'll be, walking everywhere because we don't have any oil. Well, actually, we have run out of oil as defined by the technologies of 1970s. But since then, we have developed all these technologies to get oil from unimaginable places. So we have more oil. Of course, that doesn't mean that it's limitless, but so that a large part of the solution will have to come from, of course, changing consumer behavior in the rich countries and so on. But an important part has to be in terms of coming up with technologies that are more environmentally sustainable. And frankly, it will have to be mostly done by the rich countries, because poor countries simply do not have the capabilities. Is neoliberal theory wrong or the implementation wrong? Probably both, but to think about this problem, let me give you an illustration. In the 1980s, when heterodox economists, well, I wasn't in the game yet, but like myself, argued that this one-size-fits-all strategy of the World Bank and the IMF will not work because countries have different institutions, different history, and so on. The mainstream economists actually laughed at us. They said, economics is a science, there's only one science. Would you recommend that Ghana has different physics from that in the United States? Would you recommend that Brazil has different chemistry from that of Germany? Of course not. So there's one right kind of economics and everyone has to do it. Yeah? So, really things like institutions and so on, that are only for people who are not clever enough to do hard mathematical modeling. Yeah? Now, since the late 90s, mainstream economists have become very interested in institutions, geography, culture, history. Why? Because they had to explain away their policy failures. This is what I, in some of my papers, called ABP, anything but policy. So it's the corruption, it's the culture of laziness, it's the bad geography, it's climate, it's the bad institutions, colonial history, you name it. But it's never the policy. So, well, my view is that the conception is wrong, of course, but the implementation was also wrong in the sense that, fortunately, they have finally grown out of it, but until the Asian crisis in the late 1990s, IMF would recommend 80% cuts in the bread subsidy, rice subsidy, and then they get surprised when they have a riot. This is fundamentally naive, or evil-minded. I don't know which, but how can you implement a policy which is going to blow up? So there is a serious problem with implementation, but my view is that what is more wrong is the conception, because this idea that somehow if you deregulate everything and open up everything, somehow development will happen. It hasn't happened. Another round?
You one more, if you can bear it. We'll just take two or three, just a couple of more questions.
Oh, I'm happy to take them all.
All right, we'll just take the lady at the front here. Can we just get a mic to her at the top? If you could keep your questions very short now, we'll have as many as possible, and then to give you just a few moments to bring it to an end. Yeah.
Hello. You didn't mention really ownership, and I think in the context of production, isn't it actually even the deeper cause or root for development? Production of ownership of production, ownership of resources. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. How does countries' inequality impact development? And
Sorry, can you repeat that?
how does inequality
Inequality, yeah.
Okay. You mentioned that the Asian crisis caused a rethink of some development policies. Do you think that the current crisis will eventually cause a rethink, and do you see any of changes in this thinking?
Guy behind you. Yeah.
Hi. The old developmentalism, at least in Latin America, were faced with a bunch of military dictatorship reactions. Are we free of this kind of reaction today, or do we have to worry about being called communist again?
Thank you. Yeah.
When you look at the the process of reaching countries getting rich, the industrialization process comes with colonialism, and also you have this Second World War and several world wars. Do you think development comes with a price? And what, if there's a price, what are the prices that developing countries should pay in terms to get development?
Okay, we'll just take one or two more. Yeah, let's...
One here.
Got a mic up there? Yeah, okay.
Last year, the G20 bailed out the IMF, about $1 trillion or $750 billion, but with no conditionalities. So
Very good.
If you had to devise a structural adjustment program for the IMF, what kind of policies would you suggest?
That's a great question. Okay, there's two guys at the back in the middle there. We'll take you both briefly, and then I'm afraid that will have to be it.
Hello. I was just wondering what your views on the traditional role of agriculture in industrial development was, and whether that's still relevant today.
Oh, you had the same question? Okay, so we'll just take one more from down here. Yes.
Hugh Wendland-Smith, an alumni now. Where does urbanization fit into your vision of development?
Right. Gosh, I'm asked to comment on things that I really don't know about. I'll do my best. Ownership, I take a very pragmatic view of this ownership question, because if you look at various successful development cases, you see many different forms of ownership and many different forms doing well. I mean, for example, the common perception is that state-owned enterprises are inefficient, but did you know that something like 22% of Singapore's GDP is produced by state-owned enterprises, where the corresponding ratio in the Philippines is less than 2%. So whatever it is, it can't be state ownership that or lack of it that can explain their performance difference. China has come up with some interesting hybrid forms of ownership. I mean, the famous TVs or township and village enterprises, which are legally owned by the local government of the town or the village, but for all practical purposes run as if it's the privately owned enterprises of the local political bosses. I mean, they have worked quite well, so I take a pragmatic approach. Whatever works, works. Inequality, yes. I mean, inequality, in the end, this equity issue is one of the things that drive politics. And the reason why you have good welfare state in Europe is because of the history of socialist movement, trade union movement, the Second World War, and everything. And I express my concern with the future of China and India, because the inequalities are going through the roof. Especially China. I mean, China's income distribution now in the lower division of Latin American League. I mean, that probably can be sustained in Latin America because they've had that for the last 500 years. But in China, this is new, only 30 years old. And how do you also justify that in an officially socialist country? They have a problem. Now, this is okay for the moment, because when income grows at 10% every year, even if inequalities are going through the roof, everyone's getting better off, even the kind of so-called losers. But as soon as this mega growth stops, they'll have a huge problem. India, the same problem. So I think that this is something to watch. Is the world going to change because of the current crisis? Well, I mean, telling from the report on Royal Bank of Scotland bonuses, I don't think so. How do you justify this that bank, which has been bailed out with public money, officially owned by the government, making £3.6 billion losses, handing out £1.4 billion in bonuses? Bonuses for what? For failure. My view is that there is simply too much power, too much money, and too much intellectual prestige at stake for things to change quickly. I mean, I put myself in their shoes. If you have spent last 30 years promoting efficient market hypothesis, you're not suddenly going to come out and say, sorry, I have been lying for the last 30 years. You'll find all excuse, even if it comes down to saying that, I don't know, the God is against you, to find excuse to save your theory. That brings me to this point about you put it brilliantly, that bailing out of the IMF by the G20. No conditionality. No, actually, IMF was in real big trouble before the recent financial crisis. for a couple of years before the financial crisis, it actually couldn't balance its own budget. An institution that has made a job of telling everyone else to balance their budget couldn't balance its budget. It was due for 70% staff cut. Well, God is on their side. The financial crisis happens, and suddenly they are showered with money. And the 40, no less than the 40 the structure adjustment agreement. They are back in business. Yes, I mean, they have to be given conditions. This is the whole point of, my books like, Kicking at the Ladder and Bad Samaritans. There's always double standard. Yes, so developing countries get into financial crisis. If you are Indonesia, IMF comes to you and says that you have to raise your interest rate to 80%. The United States have a financial crisis, your interest rate goes down to 0%. You borrow money from the IMF, they put condition to you. IMF borrows money, they don't have any condition. So we have to constantly expose these double standards. But yes, I think the first condition for the IMF should be to own up to the fact that they have failed. No, seriously, if the IMF was a medical doctor, it would have been sued for malpractice 75 times. No, this is a really serious problem because, I'm an economist, but economists have ruined so many people's lives. Starting from the days of Soviet central planning down to IMF structure adjustment, we have blood on our hand. For IMF economists, this number might be just one cell in their spreadsheet, but it means millions of children going hungry at school because the school cannot afford to give them free lunch anymore because of the budget cut. It means that hundreds of thousands of workers are losing their jobs and their family being ruined and so on. You don't need to put people in concentration camp to ruin their lives. But then somehow economists are immune to malpractice. Medical doctors have to live with this responsibility all the time, but economists can't do anything. And then if something goes wrong, you can blame it on their geography. How convenient. Wow. Things like Latin American military dictatorship, let's not make any assumptions. These are still relatively young democracies. Who knows that the military can come back? Price of development, my God, this is too big. Yes, the only thing I can tell you is that development never is a pretty process. Some are slightly better than others, but every country is. You think that sort of nice little countries like Finland had a picnic and developed? No, no, seriously. Finland was a Russian colony for 600 years. The Swedish colony for 600 years, and then it became Russian colony for 100 years. And it went independent at the time of the Russian Revolution, and then they had a major civil war between the left and the right. And in a country with barely 3 million people at the time, it was a short war, but something like 30,000 people were killed. And the victorious right deprived the former communists of voting right until 1944. And also when the Second World War happened, this country, having been so fed up with anything Russian, sided with the Germans. Very wrong choice. And then the Russians made them pay through their nose after the end of the war, through 10 years of very heavy repatriation. They had everything you can think of. It was the country that had the last famine in Europe, which was 1865 or something like that. It was literally the poorest European country until the 1950s. Today you think, my God, these guys had it easy. They had ethnic homogeneity, and they had good geography. I mean, they didn't have too many natural resources. No, I mean, development is always like that. So if you look at that closely enough, every country had very kind of unfortunate things happening. We can and should make these processes as painless as possible, but I mean, there never will be any development process that's nice and easy. Urbanization, I must confess that I have nothing to say on that. On agriculture, yes, I mean, agriculture, as I gave you said in the Dutch example, I mean, agriculture based on traditional technologies have never made anyone rich. But that doesn't mean that you cannot become rich with agriculture if you combine it with the right technologies. Now, you can import some of these technologies, but even to know what technologies to import, you probably need to have some industrial development, and you probably need to have capabilities to produce certain agriculture inputs. You have to have certain industrial capabilities to be able to provide the technical extension services and so on. So even if you predominantly rely on agriculture, you will need some industrial development. And also, there are cases like, I mean, it depends on the country, but cases like Germany, Japan, and South Korea, where agricultural productivity growth has provided rising rural income, which then provided the bigger domestic market for manufacturers. So it can also play an important role in demand generation for the local industries, although examples like Denmark show that probably some countries can develop on the basis of agriculture export. But even there, it wasn't free market. It was basically cooperatives and state support that made Danish agriculture successful. Okay, I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Well, I want to just thank you for, very compelling, strong, and powerful set of arguments, which turn, if I had to summarize it to someone on the phone, I'd say which turn on sort of 4 points. 1, ignore economists. 2, you thought it was never policy. But 3, it really is policy. Policy matters and matters profoundly in the way that you've argued. And then finally, watch for what the rich countries did always and do, but not what they say they did and do. And of course, you've written many compelling books precisely around these arguments. And
thank you.
So we thank you not only for tonight, but for your very sustained contribution.